There is a grief that consumes you slowly, not with one sudden blow, but with 10 years of empty promises. My name is Anna, and for a decade, my husband Michael and I desperately chased the dream of having a child. We went through countless doctors, endless tests, invasive procedures, and the slow, grinding erosion of hope. That decade wasn't just filled with medical failure, it was filled with the crushing, unspoken weight of my mother-in-law's presence, Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was a society queen. She was cold, controlling, and saw me, a simple school teacher, as an inadequate vessel for her dynasty's heir. She didn't openly oppose my marriage to Michael, but she opposed my usefulness. Her judgment was a constant, low-grade hum of disapproval. My family background was too humble, my professional ambition too small, and most damningly, my body was defective. She always played the supportive matriarch, attending our appointments, offering tearful encouragement, and insisting on organizing our vitamins and supplements. "You two are so busy, Anna." "Let me handle the organization. It's the least I can do for my grandchildren." I saw it as kindness. I see now it was surveillance and control. Every year, the doctors would tell us the same thing. Unexplained infertility. Our tests were excellent. Michael's sperm count was strong. My ovaries were healthy. Yet nothing. We spent nearly $80,000 on IVF cycles, each one failing, each failure leaving a deeper scar on my soul and my bank account. Michael was supportive, but Eleanor was always there, whispering doubt. "Perhaps it's a sign, dear. Perhaps nature is telling you to focus on your career. Some people are just not meant to be parents." The emotional toll broke me piece by piece. I blamed myself. I blamed my body. I fought with Michael, accusing him of not wanting it enough. I changed my diet, my routine, my entire life, chasing a biological destiny that seemed determined to evade me. Through it all, Eleanor was the picture of detached sympathy, always arriving with a new expensive vitamin bottle or a carefully labeled pill organizer. The facade finally cracked on our 10th wedding anniversary. Michael and I had just endured our final, most devastating IVF cycle failure. I was numb. Michael, desperate to escape the grief, booked us a spontaneous trip to a remote cabin. As I was packing my essentials, I reached for my daily vitamin bottle, the large blue one Eleanor had personally selected and organized for me months ago. The bottle was almost empty. I turned it upside down to shake out the last few capsules, but instead of the usual smooth supplements, a small, hard pellet rolled out onto my palm. It wasn't a vitamin. It was a small, white pharmaceutical pill. The kind of pill you would recognize immediately if you spent a decade in a fertility clinic. I recognized the color, the shape, the faint engraving. I felt a cold dread so profound it stopped my breathing. I ran to the bathroom, retrieved the discarded pill bottles from my previous cycles, and frantically cross-referenced the engraving. The pill was a potent medical-grade testosterone blocker, the exact type used to treat hormonal disorders in men. But the most horrifying truth lay in its strength. It was a specialized formula designed to render the user chemically infertile for several months. I stared at the pill in my hand, then I looked at the vitamin bottle Eleanor had so lovingly organized for me. The pellets were the same size, the same color, the same shape as my daily folic acid supplements. My infertility wasn't unexplained. It was manufactured. It was a deliberate 10-year-long crime. And the perpetrator wasn't a medical anomaly. It was the woman who claimed to love her son's happiness. It was Eleanor Vance. The discovery wiped out the last 10 years of grief, replacing it with a focused, blinding, annihilating rage. Eleanor hadn't just opposed our desire to have a child. She had stolen my bodily autonomy and sacrificed a decade of my life to maintain her control over Michael. I was no longer a grieving wife. I was a victim of a crime that was both medical and familial. The tiny white pellet was not just a pill, it was the entire blueprint of Eleanor Vance's soul. It was the physical proof that my decade of grief, my $80,000 of debt, and the deep emotional chasm between Michael and me had all been meticulously manufactured by the woman who claimed to be supporting us. I maintained my composure. I replaced the pill, secured the bottle, and acted as if nothing had happened. My mind raced, trying to understand the motive, not just the why, but the financial why. Eleanor was cruel, but she was never careless. This had to be tied to the Sterling legacy. My immediate focus shifted to the Vance family trust. Michael was the sole living heir to a massive generational fortune, a fortune Eleanor guarded with pathological intensity. I knew the basics. The trust was set up by Michael's grandfather and had stringent rules designed to maintain the lineage and ensure the trust remained clean. I began my investigation with the trust documents, which I accessed using Michael's digital credentials. He had stored them carelessly in a cloud file. The discovery was staggering. The trust contained a complex contingency lineage clause. This clause stipulated that upon Michael's death, the entire fortune would bypass any spouse and be immediately liquidated to fund the Vance family philanthropic initiative, unless Michael had a direct biological heir. I understood immediately. Eleanor wasn't stopping me from having a child. She was stopping Michael from having any heir. Why? The answer lay in the trust's management. The clause stipulated that if the fortune passed to the philanthropic initiative, the initiative's director would gain immediate control over the vast endowment, dictating its usage and its future. The current director of the Vance Family Philanthropic Initiative? Eleanor Vance. Eleanor hadn't wanted a grandchild. She had wanted control over the principal. If Michael had an heir, that heir would eventually inherit and manage the fortune. If Michael died childless, the money would transfer to Eleanor's direct control via the foundation she managed. I realized with a sickening clarity that Michael's life was constantly under threat, not from an enemy, but from his own mother's financial ambition. Every time we tried IVF, Eleanor was watching, hoping for failure, knowing that failure brought her closer to absolute financial dominion. The tragedy wasn't just my infertility, it was that Eleanor had incentivized Michael's potential death for profit. My focus shifted to Michael himself. I needed to test his loyalty not to me, but to the truth. I needed to know if he was a knowing participant or an oblivious victim. I told him I was done with IVF. 10 years is enough, Michael. I can't do this to my body anymore. We need to accept it. He was relieved, too relieved. Thank God, Anna. It was too much pressure. We can travel. We can focus on us. I watched his reaction when I asked a pointed question about the trust. Honey, remind me, if anything ever happened to you, who takes over the foundation? Mom, of course, he replied instantly, not looking up from his tablet. She runs the initiative. Why? I dropped the subject. Michael was not an accomplice. He was simply blindly compliant and terrified of his mother's power. Exposing Eleanor's crime to him directly would risk his life and collapse my plan. I had to assume that Eleanor, capable of poisoning my supplements, was capable of anything to secure her prize. My war was now fought on two fronts. First, against Eleanor's financial maneuverings. Second, against Michael's blind loyalty. I had to become colder, more ruthless than Eleanor, using her own rules to destroy her. I secured the only thing I needed, the pill and the empty vitamin bottle, my medical evidence of her financial crime. This evidence would not send her to prison, but it would annihilate her power. Eleanor's motive was clear: financial control, achieved through my sustained, agonizing infertility. My revenge, therefore, could not be personal. It had to be structural. I wouldn't sue her for medical malpractice. That would only generate scandal and drag Michael through court. I would attack her where she was most vulnerable: the integrity of the Vance family philanthropic initiative. The foundation was Eleanor's public persona, her shield of righteousness. It was the entire justification for her future control of the trust. I had to prove that the initiative was not an ethical endeavor, but a highly effective, decades-long cover for financial self-dealing. I hired a private forensic accountant, the same man I used in the previous battle, Mr. Chen, a man whose silence was as expensive as his expertise. I instructed him to audit the Vance family philanthropic initiative, focusing exclusively on the periods where Eleanor had gained new, substantial powers. The audit took weeks, but the results were damning. The foundation was designed to look charitable, but its finances were a maze of self-serving transactions, related party leases. The initiative was paying exorbitant rent for its headquarters to a real estate company owned entirely by Eleanor's sister. Unaccounted travel, massive luxury travel expenses, labeled fundraising missions, that consistently coincided with Eleanor's personal European vacations. The contingency lineage fund. Mr. Chen identified a specific recurring seven-figure transfer from the trust to the initiative, designated for future operational security. This, Chen confirmed, was Eleanor's private war chest, built to ensure the initiative, and therefore her control, would withstand any future legal challenge. Eleanor was not only poisoning my future, she was systematically embezzling from the charity meant to protect her son's legacy. Her financial ambition was not confined to me, it was endemic to her entire life. Armed with this evidence of fraud, I met with my attorney, Helen, again. We agreed on the final lethal strategy. We wouldn't file against Eleanor. We would file a whistleblower complaint with the IRS and the State Attorney General's office against the Vance family philanthropic initiative itself, detailing the self-dealing, the excessive management fees, and the related party transactions. The filing had two immediate guaranteed effects. It would trigger a massive, non-negotiable federal audit of the foundation, freezing its assets and seizing all internal documentation. It would instantly strip Eleanor of her directorship, as she would be the primary subject of the investigation, automatically triggering a clause in the trust that disqualified any director under federal investigation. The genius of the plan was that Michael would have no choice but to support the investigation, as its stated goal was to protect his family's legacy from Eleanor's corruption. Michael would be forced to participate in his mother's destruction. I scheduled the execution for the following Friday, the day Eleanor was hosting a major, highly publicized luncheon for the initiative's Board of Trustees. Before the submission, I had to secure my marriage one last time. I sat Michael down, presenting him with the audited financials. I didn't mention the pills. I focused purely on the money, the millions of dollars Eleanor was stealing from his legacy through the foundation. Michael was devastated, but not by the fraud. He was furious that his mother had risked the family's name for greed. "She's ruining everything, Anna. She's destroying my inheritance. We have to stop her." He signed every document necessary for the federal filing, entirely blind to the fact that I had engineered the very crisis that was about to strip his mother of everything. "We will stop her, Michael," I promised, looking at him with a chilling, empty resolve. I had secured my life, my financial future, and the annihilation of my tormentor. I was ready to pull the final trigger. The execution was set for Friday morning. I filed the voluminous whistleblower complaint with the IRS and the State Attorney General's office at 8 a.m., precisely 1 hour before Eleanor was set to address the Board of Trustees at her highly anticipated luncheon. The timing was crucial. The board had to be seated, the media had to be present, and Eleanor had to be in her gilded cage. I drove Michael to the hotel myself. He was agitated, pacing in the car, rehearsing his opening remarks for the board about the importance of ethical governance, the very governance his mother was actively undermining. I watched him, thinking of the tiny white pill in my safe deposit box, the pill that had fueled my methodical destruction of his mother's empire. Michael walked into the hotel ballroom oblivious. I stayed in the lounge checking my phone. At 8:55 a.m., the first sign appeared. A notification from the Wall Street Journal breaking the story. Vance Family Foundation director subject of massive federal whistleblower complaint. I walked into the ballroom at 9:15 a.m., just as Eleanor, radiant and icy, stepped up to the podium. The room was packed with trustees, investors, and local media. She began her speech, her voice booming with practiced righteousness. "Integrity," she declared, "is the cornerstone of the Vance legacy." That was the moment the cell phones began to ring. Whispers started in the back, growing into a frantic, low roar. Trustees were frantically checking their phones, their faces draining of color as they read the news alerts. Eleanor paused, her smile freezing. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice tight. A senior trustee stood up, clutching his phone. "Eleanor, there are reports. The foundation is under federal investigation. Claims of self-dealing, excessive compensation, and fraud. You are named as the primary subject." The room erupted. It was a cacophony of shouting, panic, and camera clicks. Eleanor, realizing the complete collapse of her world, lunged for the trustee, screaming about libel and slander, but the evidence was already public. I walked toward the head table, where Michael stood, utterly paralyzed. He was staring not at his mother, but at his phone, reading the headlines. He finally looked up and saw me standing calm and composed, the only steady figure in the swirling chaos. "Anna," he choked out, "did you know about this? Did you?" I bypassed him and walked straight to Eleanor, who was now weeping hysterically, being restrained by security. I placed my mouth close to her ear, ensuring my voice was low, clear, and utterly terrifying. "The federal investigation is my insurance policy, Eleanor," I whispered. "You stole my ability to have a child to secure your control over this foundation. Now, this foundation is taking your control over everything." Eleanor looked at me, not with hatred, but with a sudden dawning terror. She realized the scope of the conspiracy, not the fraud, but me. "The pills," she whispered, her eyes widening. "You knew about the pills. You did this because of the pills." "The pills," I confirmed, "were the evidence of your lack of morality. The fraud was the legal weapon. You stole my future, Eleanor. I stole your reputation. The foundation is gone. The control is gone. And you will never get to see a Vance grandchild." It was the ultimate, devastating blow. I didn't just strip her of her money. I stripped her of the perverse, selfish motive that drove her crime. Michael finally found his voice. It was not a voice of support for me, but a voice of fury directed at his mother. "You ruined my life, my inheritance, my name. You ruined everything." He wasn't mourning the crime against me. He was mourning the loss of his own financial security. He saw his mother as a corrupt business partner, not a monster who had destroyed his marriage. The revelation that he chose to focus on the money rather than the crime against his wife was my final painful confirmation of his weakness. He was not worth saving. The legal fallout was immediate. The foundation's accounts were frozen, and Eleanor was forced to resign. My lawyer, Helen, immediately filed for divorce, citing Michael's continued blind support of a known financial criminal, his mother, as grounds for moral abandonment and seeking a favorable division of the remaining assets. I had won the war, but the cost of the victory was the annihilation of my marriage, not just my mother-in-law. The chaos of the gala was just noise. My true victory was the profound, absolute silence that followed. Eleanor was immediately stripped of her directorship, her reputation annihilated. She faced the chilling reality of a federal audit, her massive fortune placed under intense scrutiny. She was left only with the bitter truth. She had destroyed her son's stability to gain control, and I, the woman she deemed unworthy, had ensured she gained nothing at all. Michael's final choice, to condemn his mother for ruining his inheritance rather than for the crime against me, was the last painful lesson I needed. He was not the kind prince. He was a terrified, entitled man who valued his comfort above my dignity. I granted him the swift, quiet divorce he deserved. He walked away with the minimal settlement, clinging to the remnants of his name, forced to watch the family fortune he prized so highly disappear into the hands of federal regulators. My legal life was clean. Helen had brilliantly used the pill, the physical evidence of Eleanor's crime, as irrefutable proof of her malicious intent, which fueled the financial fraud investigation. I received a significant portion of the remaining clean assets, enough to secure my financial future for life. But the true recovery was physical and emotional. I visited a new, highly specialized doctor presenting the pill and the full 10-year history of my medical ordeal. The doctor confirmed the purpose of the substance: sustained chemical infertility. The diagnosis was devastating, but the knowledge was empowering. I was not broken. I was a victim of a crime. The doctor provided counseling and physical therapy. I began the long, hard process of healing my body and my mind from the decade of medical assault and false hope. I found a deep, quiet resolve in the knowledge that the failure was never mine. It was always hers. I severed all ties to the Vance name. I moved to a quiet, unassuming town, far from the gilded cages of New York society. I bought a small house, filled it with light, and returned to my first love, painting. My canvases, once filled with the muted colors of grief and yearning, now exploded with the vibrant, wild colors of freedom and self-discovery. I had destroyed a dynasty, but I had saved myself. Years passed. I heard sporadic news. Eleanor faced years of litigation and was eventually stripped of most of her control. Michael faded into professional obscurity, forced to work in low-profile firms, perpetually haunted by the shame of his family's collapse. Their punishment was not prison. It was the loss of the only thing they ever truly valued: control and status. I looked at my life, peaceful, sovereign, and entirely mine. The ultimate irony was that Eleanor, in her ruthless quest to prevent me from having Michael's child, had inadvertently freed me to choose my own future. She stole my fertility, but she could not steal my resilience. I achieved a profound, lasting peace, not through reconciliation, but through absolute, uncompromising justice. The silence in my new home is not the empty silence of failed IVF cycles. It is the rich, comforting silence of a life finally lived on its own terms. This story proves that the greatest motive for crime is not hate, but the fear of losing control. Eleanor paid a price far greater than any money could settle. I want to ask you, the listener, if you discovered your infertility was caused by a malicious act, would you seek criminal prosecution, or would you settle for financial annihilation and the destruction of the culprit's reputation? Tell me your choice in the comments below, and subscribe to the Story Vault for more true confessions.